Imagine this. You're standing in the middle of a dense, humid jungle. It's that, really early morning light.
The air is thick. You can hear the sounds of wildlife all around you.
Exactly. And as the mist starts to clear, you see a silhouette rising above the tree line, and it's just massive.
That's almost unbelievable at first.
5 towers shaped like lotus buds piercing the sky. And they're surrounded by this moat that's so wide it looks more like an ocean. It is the single largest religious monument in the world.
It's a site that it really stays with you forever. It feels ancient, timeless, and just incredibly powerful.
But here's the kicker. You aren't in India. You're not in Varanasi or Madurai or, Kanchipur.
It's not even close.
You are thousands of miles away in Cambodia. You're looking at Angkor Wat.
And if you were to, say, hop on a plane and fly south across the equator to the island of Java in Indonesia, you'd find something just as staggering. Borobudur, the largest Buddhist monument in existence. And again, this isn't in Bodh Gaya or Sarnath, the birthplace of Buddhism. It's separated from it by an entire ocean.
So that's the mystery we're really trying to unravel today. How on earth did Indian culture, the language, the gods, the art, the philosophy, how did it manage to travel so far so early?
I mean, we're talking about a time before the internet, before steamships, before maps were even what we'd call reliable. It's an incredible story.
And crucially, how did it establish itself so deeply that the defining monuments of these, foreign lands are actually monuments to Indian faith?
It's a story of adventure, for sure, of dangerous sea voyages, and, it's perhaps the most successful campaign of soft power in all of human history.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
It's great to be here.
Today is a special one. This is our Simplified UPSC by PPP edition, and we are tackling a massive topic, a topic that is, let's just say it's a favorite of the examiners.
We are indeed. And because this is a special educational deep dive, one that's really designed to help you crush those exams, we have a humble request right at the top here.
If you're finding value in this, if these deep dives are helping you retain this, let's face it, mountain of history syllabus, please subscribe to the YouTube channel.
It sounds like a small thing, but it really, really helps the algorithm. It helps push this content to other serious learners just like you.
And for those of you who are capable, and look, we know times are tight, so only if you can, please consider supporting the team on Patreon.
It's what allows Simplified UPSC by PPP to keep the lights on and keep this content flowing. And to our current supporters, a massive, massive shout out. You are the fuel for this engine. We couldn't do it without you.
Absolutely. Also, while you're at it, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment. Tell us which part of this history surprised you the most. That engagement really keeps the community alive and kicking.
Okay, one last bit of logistics before we dive into the history. If you're sitting there scrambling to write all this down.
Sure. Please, stop. We've got you covered.
Free notes, complete with practice. Previous year questions or PYQs are waiting for you on our public Telegram channel. The link is in the description.
And if you want the VIP treatment, access to the full private library, all the videos at once, the premium organized notes, model mains answers, the whole works, just send a DM to us on the public channel to join the private group.
All right. Logistics handled. So what is our mission today?
Our mission is to perform a comprehensive audio autopsy of the Tamil Nadu Board Class East Eye History textbook, specifically Chapter 14, The Spread of Indian Culture in Other Asian Countries.
But let's be clear, we are not just going to sit here and recite the textbook. That would be
a cure for insomnia.
Exactly. We're analyzing the transmission mechanisms, the specific dynasties, the art forms, and crucially, we're linking every single insight back to the UPSC syllabus and the kind of questions you're going to face in that exam hall.
So let's get into it. Section 1. The nature of cultural expansion. Now, when we hear the word expansion in history books, especially ancient history, our brains, they usually default to one specific image.
War. Absolutely. We think of horses thundering across the plains, cities burning, arrows flying.
The Roman legions, Alexander the Great, the Mongols.
Yes. We just assume that for a culture to spread, soldiers have to march first. The flag follows the sword.
Exactly. The assumption is that culture is forced upon people. But the source text makes a very specific, a very emphatic distinction here when it comes to Indian expansion.
It does. And this is probably the single most important concept to grasp from this entire chapter. It clarifies that this Indian expansion into Southeast Asia and Central Asia was not colonialism or imperialism in the modern sense.
Okay, let's unpack that. That's a huge statement.
Yeah.
So if I'm a king in ancient Cambodia, I'm not paying tribute or taxes to some centralized throne back in Pataliputra or Kanchipuram.
Precisely. That's the key difference. The colonies, and historians use that word very, very loosely in this context. They were politically independent. They had their own sovereigns, their own treasuries, their own armies.
But culturally they were, what, plugged in?
Culturally, they were integrated. They voluntarily adopted the software, if you will, of Indian civilization.
Wow. That is a fascinating distinction. It's a conquest of hearts and minds, then, rather than a conquest of territory. So if the agents of this change weren't soldiers, who were they?
They were the risk-takers, the entrepreneurs of the ancient world.
The traders and the merchants?
The traders, the merchants. The text highlights that from the very beginning of the Christian era. And actually, we have evidence from even before that Indian merchants were looking east.
The text uses this really beautiful, evocative term for it, Suvarnabhumi.
Yes, the land of gold. This was the catch-all term that ancient Indian traders used for the East Asian region generally. It wasn't one specific place. It was more of an idea.
A direction.
And it tells you everything about their motivation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It does. It suggests what was driving them. It wasn't, religious zealotry, at least not initially. It was opportunity. It was wealth, spices, exotic woods, and yes, gold.
It sounds a bit like the El Dorado of the ancient Eastern world.
In many ways it was. And we have to give credit here to the geography and the technology of the time. The text mentions that the east coast of India is just studded with ports.
So they had the launch pads.
They have the launch pads, and the Indians were master mariners. They had been for centuries. They looked out at the Bay of Bengal not as a barrier, but as a highway.
A very dangerous highway, I imagine.
Oh, not at all easy. You're dealing with monsoons, pirates, the sheer uncertainty of it all. But once those trade routes were established, it opened up a pipeline. And this is where the cultural transfer begins.
How so?
Well, think about it. You sail to Sumatra or the Malay Peninsula. You can't just trade and leave the next day. You have to wait for the winds to change to sail home. You might be there for months.
So you're living among the local population.
You're living there. You don't just exchange goods, you exchange ideas. You celebrate your festivals, like Diwali or Holi. You pray to your gods in a small makeshift shrine. The locals watch you, they get curious, they ask questions. And that's where the cultural osmosis begins.
So the traders basically open the door.
And then the missionaries, the intellectuals, they walk right through it. The Brahmins and the Buddhist monks followed the merchant ships. They brought the texts, the philosophies, the rituals.
What's the timeline we should have in our heads for this invasion of ideas?
It's a long, slow process, but the textbook says it really starts to accelerate during the Gupta period in the north. So that's around the 4th, 5th centuries AD. But, and this is a key point for anyone studying South Indian history, it gets a massive, massive boost from the Pallavas.
The Pallavas from Kanchipuram, the great maritime dynasty.
The very same. Their influence on Southeast Asian art and script is just immense.
And the output, so to speak, of this export. We're not just talking about selling pepper and sandalwood anymore.
No. This was a full-stack cultural export. We are talking about languages. Sanskrit and Pali became the Latin of the East, the languages of the court and of religion.
Okay.
Talking about religion, obviously Hinduism in its Shaivite and Vaishnavite forms, and Buddhism, both Mahayana and Hinayana. And then there's the art, the architecture, the social customs, even administrative systems and ideas of kingship.
It really puts the whole modern concept of soft power into perspective. We talk about American soft power today with Hollywood, blue jeans, pop music.
Right.
But this was Indianization on a scale that is just mind-boggling.
And unlike modern trends, which might last a decade or two, this cultural framework lasted for over a millennium. It shaped entire civilizations.
Okay, let's try and break this down geographically because it's a huge area. The source text divides this expansion into specific routes. Let's start with section 2, the northern and eastern route. So we're looking at Central Asia, China, and Tibet.
Right. And we often forget Central Asia in this story. When modern people think of that region, the stands, we think of it as a purely Islamic cultural sphere.
Sure.
But in the early centuries of the Common Era, for, good 1,000 years, Central Asia was this vibrant, thriving melting pot of Buddhism and Indian culture.
The text specifically mentions two places, Khotan and Kashgar.
Yes, in what is today the modern Xinjiang region of China. These weren't just dusty rest stops on the Silk Road. They were major centers of Buddhist learning.
So what have we found there?
Archaeologists have literally dug into the sands there and found the ruins of stupas, monasteries, and vast libraries of Sanskrit texts written on birch bark and palm leaves.
That is incredible. To think of Sanskrit chanting echoing in the deserts of Xinjiang.
It was the bridge. Central Asia was the crucial gateway for Indian culture to enter China. It was the overland funnel.
Which brings us to the big one, China. The text mentions two routes to get into China.
That's right. There was the land route we just discussed, through the treacherous passes of Central Asia. And then there was a sea route that went via Burma and hugged the coast.
And the main product being exported to China was
Buddhism. Buddhism was the vehicle. The text says it started entering China around the beginning of the 1st century AD. But what I really want listeners to focus on is the sheer intellectual effort that was involved here. This was not easy.
You mean the language barrier?
Oh, it was immense. Chinese, a tonal logographic language, and Sanskrit, an alphabetic inflectional language. They are from completely different language families.
So how do you even begin to translate a concept?
Exactly. How do you translate a complex metaphysical idea like shunya, emptiness, or dharma, into Chinese characters without losing the entire meaning? It was a monumental, centuries-long task.
The text lists a few of the Indian scholars who actually went there to do this heavy lifting. Gunapadra, Vajrabothi, Dharmadeva.
These men were intellectual giants. They didn't just translate word for word, they had to interpret. They set up these huge translation bureaus, sponsored by the Chinese emperors. And it's important to remember, it wasn't a one-way street. That's the beauty of it.
Ah, the Chinese travelers coming to India.
Exactly, the reverse pilgrimage.
Yeah.
We have these famous names like Hiuen, who came during the Gupta period, and of course, Xuanzang.
Also known as Xuanzang.
Yes.
Let's pause on Xuanzang for a second. He's a favorite of the UPSC examiners. He pops up all the time.
He is, and for very good reason. He came to India in the 7th century during the reign of the great king Harsha of Kanauj. He was on a mission to get authentic Buddhist scriptures.
And he studied at Nalanda, right? The famous university.
He did. He spent years there. And his travelogue, the CUK, or Records of the Western World, is one of our absolute primary sources for understanding that entire period of Indian history.
Now, there's a specific connection to a previous year question here, isn't there? Something about his observations.
Yes, absolutely. The 2013 preliminary exam had a question that directly referenced his observations on law and order in India.
So what did he have to say? Was it this perfect golden age we sometimes imagine?
Well, this is what makes his account so valuable. It's not just praise. Contrary to the Romanticism, where we think everything was perfect, he actually noted that the roads weren't completely safe.
He got robbed.
He was robbed a couple of times.
Yeah.
But he also praised the administration's generosity, the low taxes, and the incredible intellectual vibrancy of the society. The key takeaway for an aspirant is that these travelers were like the journalists of their day. They recorded the social reality, warts and all.
And this cultural exchange, it wasn't just texts and ideas, it extended to art as well.
A huge influence. If you look at the famous Buddhist grottos in China, places like Dunhuang or the Longmen Caves, the statues have distinct Indian features.
What should we look for?
The style of the robes, the facial expressions, the postures, the Gandhara school of art with its Greco-Roman influence, and the purely indigenous Mathura school of art. Both of these heavily influenced the development of Chinese Buddhist art.
Okay, moving a bit closer to India, but still across those formidable mountains. Tibet.
Tibet's story starts a little later, really taking off in the 7th century. The text highlights a king named Somsen Gampo. He's the one who founded the city of Lhasa and formally introduced Buddhism as a state religion.
But there's a fact here that always blows my mind every time I hear it. It's about the Tibetan script itself.
It's a fantastic piece of trivia, and it's so important. The Tibetan alphabet was actually devised by Todmi Sambota, who was one of the king's ministers. He was sent to India to study.
And he based it on an Indian script.
He based it on Indian scripts, specifically later versions of the Gupta and Brahmi scripts. So literally, every time you see Tibetan writing, you are looking at a direct cousin of Devanagari and other Indian scripts. The DNA is right there.
And there's a later connection with Bengal, too, right? The Pala dynasty.
This is crucial for connecting the dots across different chapters of Indian history. In the 11th century, the Pala dynasty in Bengal and Bihar was the last great patron of Buddhism in India. They had very, very close ties with Tibet. Scholars and monks traveled back and forth.
And then came the invasions of North India.
Right. When the Turkic Islamic conquests swept through Bengal and Bihar, and they destroyed the great monastic universities like Nalanda and Vikramshila, what happened to all those learned monks?
They had to flee.
They didn't just vanish.
Yeah.
Many of them fled north over the Himalayas to Tibet.
Taking their precious texts and their traditions with them.
Exactly. This massive influx of refugees, highly educated, philosophically trained refugees, is what helped to establish and solidify what we now call Tibetan Buddhism or Lamaism. So political turmoil in Bengal directly shaped the religious structure of Tibet. It just shows you how interconnected the history of this entire region really is.
Let's move south now. We're going to section 3, the southern neighbor, across the Palk Strait to Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka is a really unique case in this chapter. The text makes a point to say that while the political history was often very different.
You mean they had their own proud lineage of kings, their own wars, sometimes even fighting against Indian kings like the Cholas?
Exactly. Politics was politics. But the cultural history is almost indistinguishable from that of India. It's a shared story.
And it starts with the heavy hitters. You can't get much heavier than Emperor Ashoka.
It starts right at the top. Ashoka's own children, his son Mahinda and daughter Sanghamitta. They were the original missionaries. They went to Sri Lanka in the 3rd century BC.
And they famously carried a branch of the original Bodhi tree with them.
They did. And that tree, or its direct descendant, is still there in Anuradhapura. It's known as the Jaya Sri Mahabodhi. It is the oldest historically documented tree in the entire world.
That is just wild. And this mission, it established Buddhism as the absolute bedrock of Sri Lankan culture.
Specifically, the Hinayana or Theravada school of Buddhism. It was further consolidated in the 5th century AD by a very famous scholar named Buddhaghosa, who went there from India and wrote extensive commentaries.
But again, it wasn't just religion in the abstract. Let's talk about the visuals. If you go to Sri Lanka today, what do you see that just screams Indian influence?
You have to look at Sigiriya.
The Lion Rock.
I've seen the photos. It's this absolutely massive rock fortress that just juts out of the jungle floor. It's breathtaking.
And halfway up that rock face, in a sheltered gallery, there are these frescoes, these beautiful paintings of women, often called the Cloud Maidens.
Okay.
Now, if you're a student of Indian art history, the moment you see them, a bell goes off. You look at the style, the way the eyes are drawn, the shading, the jewelry, the sheer quality of the line, and it is a direct sibling of the paintings at the Ajanta Caves in Maharashtra.
The resemblance is that close.
It's unmistakable. It tells you that the art of stone carving and fresco painting, the techniques, the aesthetics, they migrated right alongside the religion. So it's a complete cultural package. You don't just export the god. You export the temple he lives in, the language used to praise him, and the art that depicts him.
You got it. It's a holistic transfer of an entire worldview.
Okay, let's get on a boat. We're sailing east across the Bay of Bengal to the land of gold. This brings us to Section 4, Southeast Asia, the mainland.
This is where the story gets really, really grand. We are talking about Cambodia, or as it was known in the ancient Sanskrit texts, Kampuja.
Even the name sounds Sanskrit.
It is. The text says it was colonized, again, culturally colonized, as early as the 1st century A.D. The indigenous people were the Khmers, a very ancient and proud people. But the ruling dynasties that emerged, they adopted Indian names. They were called the Varmans.
Varmans, that rings a bell. The Pallavas in South India. Mahendra Varman, Narasimha Varman.
Exactly. It is a direct nod to the South Indian Kshatriya tradition. The Varman suffix means protector or armor. It implies a lineage of protection and martial power.
Who are the big names we need to remember here for the exam?
The text mentions a few, but there are 2 major ones you have to know. An early king named Yasovarman, and then the big boss, Srivijaya II.
Srivijaya II. He's the architect of Angkor Wat.
He is. And we need to clarify something for our listeners right away, because this is a very common point of confusion.
Right.
Angkor Wat is in a Buddhist country today. You see monks in saffron robes wandering through his corridors.
Right.
But it was not built as a Buddhist temple.
It was Hindu.
It was a temple dedicated to the god Vishnu. It's one of the grandest masterpieces of Vaishnavism in the world.
So describe it for us. Architecturally, why is it so special?
It's the scale, but it's also the symbolism. It's built in what we call a Dravidian style, with those terrace structures and long covered galleries. The central tower, the highest one, represents Mount Meru.
The center of the Hindu universe.
Precisely. The 5 peaks of the mythical mountain, and the huge moat around it represent the cosmic ocean. It is a model of the universe in stone.
And the walls. They tell a story, don't they?
Oh, they are like a graphic novel carved in stone. There are literally miles of bas-reliefs. They depict the Samudra Manthan, the churning of the ocean of milk to get the elixir of immortality. They show epic scenes from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata.
So you could walk along these walls and read the entire story of the Battle of Kurukshetra.
You could. It's absolutely amazing to think that a Khmer stone carver in the 12th century knew the intricate details of these Indian epics.
It shows how deeply the stories were embedded in their culture.
It does. The text mentions that knowledge of the Vedas, of Panini's grammar for Sanskrit, and of the Dharmashastras was common among the elite. These weren't just pretty pictures on a wall. The intellectual tradition that underpinned them was alive and kicking in Cambodia.
Let's move just next door to Champa. Now that's modern-day Vietnam, correct?
Specifically the southern part of modern Vietnam, what was called South Annam. The text mentions that the first Hindu dynasty was established there by a king named Sri Mara as early as the 2nd century AD.
Sri Mara, again a Sanskrit name.
Yes. And Champa is interesting because it really shows the religious tolerance and diversity of the region. Saivism, the worship of Shiva, and Vaishnavism flourished there. We have found beautiful temples to both. But Buddhism existed right alongside them, peacefully.
It seems like these polytheistic societies were much more open to sort of layering religions rather than having to completely replace one with another.
That is a key insight. You can add a new god to your pantheon. You don't necessarily have to subtract an old one. It's a very different mindset from the Abrahamic traditions.
Okay, let's move west from there to Siam, or as we know it today, Thailand.
Thailand's connection is so visible. Even today, it's almost startling when you realize the depth of it.
How so? Where do we see it?
Well, let's start with the language. The Thai script, just like the Tibetan one, was developed with the help of Indian scholars based on Indian alphabets. But look at their traditional law.
Their law, like their legal code.
Exactly. The traditional legal code of Thailand was based on the Dharmashastras, the ancient Indian legal texts like the Manusmriti, though of course it was adapted to their local customs.
And what about the monarchy? I've heard there's a connection there.
A huge one. The king of Thailand is traditionally seen as an avatar of Rama. That's why the current dynasty is the Chakri dynasty, and the kings are named Rama X. The capital of the old Siamese kingdom was Ayutthaya.
Named after Ayodhya, Rama's capital.
Named directly after Ayodhya. It's not subtle.
Wow. I knew about the Ramakyan, their national epic, which is their version of the Ramayana, but I didn't realize the legal and political DNA was so deeply Indian.
It is absolutely foundational. And get this. Even today, in modern Thailand, the coronation of the Thai king is officiated by Brahmin priests, the royal Brahmins, in a country that is 95% Buddhist.
That is incredible resilience. And finally, for the mainland tour, Myanmar, or Burma,
our immediate eastern neighbor. The contacts go way back to Ashoka's time. But linguistically, the text notes that Pali and Sanskrit were used as the languages of the elite and for inscriptions all the way until the 13th century. That is a massive 1,000-year run.
So if I was a scholar or a monk in 12th century Burma, I'd likely be writing my treatises in Pali.
It's very likely, yes.
Mm.
And religiously, it was a mix. Both Hinayana and Mahayana Buddhism coexisted there for a long time before Theravada became dominant.
Okay, let's leave the mainland now. The story's not over. This brings us to Section 5, the Malay Archipelago. We're heading out into the islands. This feels like an adventure movie setting. Pirates, spices, maritime empires.
It really is. The maritime history here is just spectacular. And we have to start with the island of Sumatra.
And the empire of Srivijaya.
This was the powerhouse.
Yeah.
From the 7th century onwards, if you wanted to trade by sea between India and China, you likely had to pass through Srivijaya's waters and control the Malacca Strait.
The most important choke point in all of maritime Asia.
Exactly. And they got very, very rich on tolls and trade. Later, this kingdom evolved into the Great Shailendra Empire, which controlled both Sumatra and Java.
Now, the Shailendras, this is where we get a really cool crossover episode with Indian history, isn't it?
We certainly do. The Shailendras were devout Mahayana Buddhists, but they had very cordial and active diplomatic relations with the Indian kingdoms, specifically the Palas of Bengal, who are also Buddhists, and the mighty Cholas of Tamil Nadu.
The Cholas, the great maritime power of the south, the guys with the powerful navy.
The very same. And there's a specific anecdote in the text about the great Chola king, Rajaraja Chola I.
What did he do?
He actually gave permission to the Shailendra king, whose name, get ready for it, was Maravia Yotunga Varman.
Wow, okay, I'm very glad you had to say that and not me.
It is a mouthful.
Mm-hmm.
But Rajaraja allowed this Sumatran king to build a Buddhist monastery at Nagapattinam, which was a major Chola port city in Tamil Nadu. It was called the Chudamani Vihara.
Okay, wait. So a Sumatran king is building a Buddhist monastery in India with the permission and probably the patronage of a powerful Tamil Hindu king.
It shows the level of diplomacy, it shows the mutual respect and the constant interaction, but it didn't last. The friendship soured.
There's always a but in history, isn't there?
There is. Rajaraja's son, Rajendra Chola Sirius, who was even more ambitious, actually invaded the Shailendras. He launched this massive naval expedition across the Bay of Bengal and conquered the Srivijaya kingdom for a brief time.
Why? If they were friends just a generation earlier.
The sources are a bit vague, but it was likely over trade disputes. The Shailendras might have been squeezing the Tamil merchants too hard with their tolls or trying to block Chola access to the lucrative China trade.
So Rajendra Chola wanted to show them who really ruled the waves.
You could call it ancient gunboat diplomacy. Or longboat diplomacy, perhaps.
I like that.
Eventually, Srivijaya regained its independence. But it's a fantastic example that shows that while culture was shared and respected, politics was still politics. National and economic interests always matter.
Let's sail over to the next island, Java.
Java is home to the kingdom of Mataram, which was a strong Hindu center. But the absolute crown jewel of Java, and perhaps of the entire region, is Borobudur.
Built under the patronage of the Shailendras.
That's right. Between about 750 and 850 AD. The textbook calls it, very poetically, an epic in stone.
We mentioned it in the intro. Break it down for us. What makes it so special?
It's a massive stupa, but it's designed as a three-dimensional mandala, a spiritual diagram. It has 9 terraces. The lower terraces are square, which represents the earth, or the world of desire, Kamahatu.
Okay.
The middle terraces are circular, representing the heavens, or the world of form, Drupatatu. And as you walk up these terraces,
It's a physical journey.
it's a pilgrimage. You pass these open galleries with over 2,000 carved bas-reliefs that depict the life of the Buddha and his previous lives, the Jataka tales.
So you are physically ascending towards enlightenment, and as you do, you're visually learning the Dharma from the walls around you.
Precisely. It is an architectural representation of the entire Buddhist philosophical path. When you finally reach the top, the 3 circular platforms, there are no more carvings, just bell-shaped stupas in the open sky. You've reached the world of formlessness, arupatatu, nirvana.
That is profoundly beautiful. And finally, in our island tour, the survivor, Bali.
Bali is the great anomaly. The text says it came under Hindu rule in the 6th century. We also have accounts from the Chinese traveler Tsang, who refers to Buddhism being practiced there in the 7th century. But here's the thing. As the centuries passed, Java and Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula converted to Islam.
Through the traders again, this time from Arabia and Gujarat.
Exactly. Arab and Indian Muslim traders brought Islam, and it spread very effectively. But Bali somehow resisted the change. It remained Hindu.
And it still is to this day.
It still is. They maintain a unique form of Hinduism. They have a version of the caste system, the rituals, the temples, the incredible Ramayana dance dramas. It is a living museum of that ancient cultural connection, isolated from the mainland but thriving.
Okay, that was an incredible tour. We have covered the what and the where. Now this brings us to section 6, the PYQ linkage and critical analysis. Because this is simplified UPSC, we have to do the so what.
This is the part of the show where we separate the casual listeners from the serious aspirants. It's not enough to know this information. You have to know how to use it in the exam.
Let's start with geography. You mentioned a specific question about cities earlier.
Yes, the 2014 preliminary question, CSP. It was a mapping question. It asked for the correct sequence of 4 cities from south to north.
Bangkok?
Hanoi, Jakarta, Singapore.
Now, on the surface, that sounds like a pure geography question, not a history one.
It is, strictly speaking, but studying this chapter gives you the mental map you need to answer it. If you just try to memorize coordinates or look at a map once, you'll forget.
But if you remember the history.
The Shailendra Empire was based in Java and Sumatra, so Jakarta is way down south in the islands. Singapore is at the strategic tip of the Malay Peninsula. Bangkok is the capital of Siam on the mainland, and Hanoi is in Vietnam, the old kingdom of Champa, which is much further north, closer to China.
You build a narrative map in your head, the history informs the geography.
Exactly. You're not just memorizing dots on a map. You're visualizing the empires and their relationships. It makes the information stick.
That is a fantastic tip. Don't just memorize, visualize the empires. What about art and culture? Any direct links?
Oh, plenty. There was a 2014 CSP question about Kalaripayattu, the ancient martial art.
Which is from Kerala in South India, right?
It is. But think about the Cholas and their naval expeditions, the constant trade. Yeah. Martial traditions, just like dance forms and architectural styles, traveled too. And consider the 2013 GS1 Mains question about the Tribhanga pose.
The classic three-bend pose in Indian sculpture and dance.
Right. The question asks you to explain it. The definition is one leg is bent and the body is slightly but oppositely curved at the waist and neck. Now, why does this matter for this chapter?
You find this pose in Southeast Asian art.
You find it everywhere. When you look at the sculptures of the Apsaras in Angkor Wat, or the reliefs in Borobudur, or the frescoes of the Cloud Maidens in Sigiriya, you see the Tribhanga pose.
So it's the signature of Indian sculptural aesthetics exported across the ocean.
It's the artistic DNA. So if you get a question about Indian art's influence abroad, you can specifically cite the prevalence of the Tribhanga pose in Cambodian and Javanese temples as concrete proof of cultural continuity. That's a high-level connection that will impress an examiner.
And what about philosophy?
The 2013 CSP had a question about the Sankhya school of philosophy, one of the 6 classical schools.
Okay, a pretty deep cut.
A very deep cut. But the point is, the textbook for this chapter explicitly says, Hindu philosophical treatises were all known to the people of Cambodia. That doesn't just mean the Puranas. It likely includes the core philosophical schools. Sankhya, Nyaya, Vedanta. These complex metaphysical ideas were being debated and discussed in the royal courts of the Khmer Empire.
And finally, let's connect it to architecture.
The 2020 GS1 Mains paper had a question about rock-cut architecture, asking you to discuss it as a source of our history. Now, you can give a perfectly good answer just using Indian examples. Ajanta, Ellora, Elephanta, Mahabalipuram. That is a standard, solid answer.
But we're not aiming for standard. We want the model answer.
Exactly. Imagine the value add if, in your conclusion, you mentioned that this Indian tradition of rock-cut art and monumental stonework directly inspired later creations like the frescoes of Sigiriya in Sri Lanka and influenced the monumental stone temples of Southeast Asia.
It shows the examiner you have a much broader understanding. It shows you know that Indian art didn't just stop at the border.
That is the extra mark strategy. It's about showing analytical depth. And for the mains exam, think about a broad prompt like, discuss the unique resilience and methods of preservation of Indian culture.
How does this chapter help with that?
Well, you can argue that unlike ancient Egyptian or Mesopotamian culture, which were largely replaced or lost, Indian culture expanded and survived precisely because it knew how to assimilate.
The textbook mentions the concept of India as a land of unity and diversity.
Yes, because India itself was already so diverse, it had spent centuries mixing Aryan, Dravidian, Greek, Scythian, Kushan influences. It was uniquely practiced at cultural assimilation. It knew how to blend without breaking.
So when it went to Southeast Asia, it didn't try to wipe out the local culture. It didn't say, you must stop being Khmer.
Exactly. It said, be Khmer, but here is a new framework of kingship, a new set of epic stories, a new philosophical lens to see the world. It blended. The local culture wasn't destroyed. It was enriched and given a new vocabulary. That is a very powerful argument for a mains answer about the nature of Indian civilization's soft power.
That is a fantastic insight. It wasn't a replacement, it was a synthesis. Okay, we are coming to the end of our deep dive. Let's do a quick recap. What's the mission takeaway from today?
The number one takeaway is that Indian culture spread primarily through trade and religion, through soft power, not by the sword. Remember the key monuments. Angkor Wat in Cambodia, a temple to Vishnu. Borobudur in Java, a monument to the Buddha's path. Remember the key interactions. The complex relationship of the Cholas and Shailendras, the great translation bureaus in China.
And as always, we like to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to chew on after the deep dive is over.
Here it is. Indian culture, in its Hindu-Buddhist form, dominated this vast region for nearly 1,500 years. That is a staggering amount of time, longer than the Roman Empire lasted. But then, starting around the 15th century, the winds changed. Islam arrived and took root in places like Indonesia and Malaysia.
And Buddhism remained dominant on the mainland in places like Thailand and Cambodia.
Right, but Bali remained Hindu. So the question is why? What makes one culture persist in a specific pocket while it fades or is replaced in the surrounding areas? Is it something about the geography, the fact that it's an island? Is it the specific nature of the belief system that developed there? Or was it some form of political choice or isolation?
It's worth mulling over. It's a question about the resilience and adaptability of culture itself. Why does it stick like glue in some places and slide right off in others?
Exactly.
Yeah.
History is never just about what happened. It's about asking why it happened that way and not some other way.
All right. That is it for today. We hope you enjoyed this journey across the Suvarnabhumi. Please, if you haven't yet, take a moment to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It really, really helps us out.
And do check out the Patreon link if you're in a position to support us. We appreciate every one of you more than you know.
And don't forget to head over to the Telegram channel for those free notes and PYQs. And if you want the premium experience, the private library, the detailed notes, the model answers, just DM us on the public channel to join.
Keep learning and keep questioning everything.
And we'll see you in the next deep dive.
Goodbye.